Okay, first of all, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Enterprise Mobile Development Patterns, Products, and Platforms. Before we go into a panel discussion, let me give you an introductions about today's event. In this session, we will try to capture the most of the aspects such as the architecture, testing, development, and building a multidiscipline mobile application into an enterprise session as much as we could. So, to introduce our panel, today we have Robert Spinweber from Cisco Lab Austin. Robert is the engineering director who leads the team that is responsible for the delivery of the Cisco Shop mobile app. His passion for mobile application development began over a decade ago when he built his first iOS app. Since then, he has held various roles developing enterprise-grade apps for corporations such as IBM, Charles Schwab, and Visa. Robert believes that writing clean code and adhering to solid architectural pattern is the key to producing high-quality applications. Robert holds a BSc in Computer Engineering from Charles Case Western Reserve University and an MBA from the University of Texas in Dallas. And also, Charles gonna bring us a lot of experience and from his lesson learns and from the things he has gathered from different various organizations. And the next we have Charles, but we always call him Chuck, Chuck Imperato from. He's also from Cisco Labs Austin team. Chuck has over 10 years of mobile development experience across multiple enterprise domains, including collaboration, in the auto industry, fitness, and food distribution and sales. He has a passion for application architecture and is always working towards writing clean, testable code. Chuck holds a BS in computer science from Siena College and has worked a large enterprise organizations such as IBM and IBM, General Motors, and also right now here with us in Cisco. So about myself, my name is Ashan Dhanapala. I'll be your moderator for the evening, and I'm also from Cisco Lab Sri Lanka. I have over 8 years of experience in mobile application development in various countries such as USA, Malaysia, Norway, Romania, and Singapore, and over here in Sri Lanka also. I have worked in domains such as finance, multimedia, healthcare, and right now it's food services and logistics. So that's our lineup for today. Uh, Please note that questions are always welcome. Please use the link that has shared by our team in the chat. You can use to send us questions, and I'll try my best to squeeze in most of the questions to our discussion. So just to start off, I will take the first question to Robert. So rather than going in the usual way, let me ask this question. Because when you say enterprise applications, Robert, we do have many phases. I mean, you can't really say what is an enterprise and what is not. So if I ask you, what are the challenges that enterprise organization may face when it's come to mobile development in larger scale? Robert, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I knew I was going to do that. So enterprise mobile development. So, when you talk about enterprise development, there are actually, there's two, you can think of two scenarios, right? But for the purposes of this discussion, I think we want to focus on the development of consumer-facing applications, mobile apps, by an enterprise versus, sometimes people think of enterprise as being the development of apps, programs, solutions for an enterprise. So I want to make sure that we, kind of make that distinction before we really get started. So enterprise mobile development, right? That sounds very complicated and very
Exactly.
scary. And naturally, well, I'll say, it is. But there are both. You are dealing with both, you know, potentially organizational challenges, right? One of the, kind of one of the things that you think about as a with an enterprise is you've got a large, a potentially large organization, right?
Yeah.
Versus, individuals, right? Or a
Yeah.
smaller scale shop. So you've got the organizational aspects, tactical, challenges that you're going to have to deal with. And then you also have the the nature of the challenges with mobile development. So
Yeah.
I'm actually going to take a minute because I don't know the background of all of the attendees. So I'm gonna take a few minutes and I'm gonna talk about you know uh, some challenges with mobile development. So I think most of us would agree that software engineering as a discipline is uh, it's difficult, right? It's
Yeah.
inherently hard, right? Otherwise I'll say everybody would do it, right?
Yeah.
So, but you take that and then you compound it with, all the added the extra difficulties that are present on mobile. It becomes even more daunting. So I'm going to so in my not so distant past, and Chuck may disagree with me on this. I used to be a mobile developer, right? So I'm going to draw from some of my experiences there to describe some of the challenges that I think that the main challenges I think that are out there. First is if you have decided if once you've made the decision to do a fully native solution, you have now committed to building it twice, right? You're going to do it most likely, right?
Yeah.
Solution is going to need to run on iOS. Your solution is going to need to run on Android. Thankfully, now it's only two. Back when I
Yeah.
started, it was four. Because you also had to throw, BlackBerry, actually Palm also, right? Sometimes,
Yeah.
and Windows Mobile. So at least now we're down to only having to do it twice.
Yeah.
So you're doing it twice, right? But each of those platforms also, has their own, classes of challenges within them, right? One of the main is, one of the main challenges and burdens is, OS fragmentation. It, it varies across the platforms, right? As iOS, I think we've got four now, right? Four supported versions and new ones every year, right?
Yeah.
WWDC was just last week, so
Yeah.
we got a new one. But then you look at Android, right? I don't know how many Android versions are out there. I think there's like 6 billion. So
Yeah.
that that makes that adds a lot of trouble, right? And things that you need in considerations in your development, right? Also, not only do you have OS, the OS fragmentation, you've got seemingly endless combinations of manufacturers building devices with many form factors and screen sizes, right? And that is just with phones, right? That is not even considering the now we also have tablets that we have
Yeah.
to take into consideration. So
Exactly.
you know that's something that you also have to deal with, right? And then and the decisions that you make as an organization, and maybe this is an organizational challenge, is determining it's impossible to serve the entire give attention to every a combination of, device and OS and manufacturer and screen size and, whatnot. So you got to do your best to, kind of analyze your expected usage patterns and tailor your, your focus to cover, the 80% rule or whatnot, right? The other, okay, now let's talk about some of the technical challenges, right? Security. Our devices have become they are the center of a lot of people's universes, right? We entrust a lot of our personal and financial data to the apps that are running on them. So as app developers, we have a duty to protect that data as best we can. And I think that is one of the, kind of the unique, technical advantages that we have on mobile, right? We can actually protect that natively, say maybe a little bit, better. So you're ready to start your development, right? Now you've learned your platform, right? You've learned the architecture of your platform. You learned all the best practices. You've mastered, the unique tool set. Now you are ready to start an app. You start building an app that is running on a device where you do not have unlimited memory, CPU, battery life, etc. And on top of that, so you have to take all that into consideration, right? Because nobody loves an app that, more that, everybody's favorite apps are those that you're going to drain their battery, right? As soon as they start using them, right? You need to make sure that you're a well-behaved citizen. And then lastly, if your app is dependent on client server communication, your app now needs to be resilient enough to behave well when your connectivity is unreliable, because that's what I have been one of the first things that you learn in doing mobile development is you have to assume that you do not have a network, and what are the consequences of that, right? Anyway, so that's kind of a brief, well, maybe not so brief, synopsis of some of my personal opinions on the unique challenges of mobile development. So now I'm going to, also, I should also remember to breathe, right? So that we can ask questions. I'm trying to go slow. Now I'll shift over to, some of the organizational and tactical challenges that, that you might face as an enterprise. So, when you think of an enterprise, generally you think about, an organization, having an organization that is supported by, multiple, teams, right? So you've got a lot of, say you've got a pool of developers, enough developers, engineers, to be able to, organize them, into multiple teams. So your first inclination is to take the folks, the team, and distribute them, into the teams based on, their experience level, their expertise, their geographic location, taking all of those into consideration and building the first thing is, trying to build the most efficient team that you can with, the staff that you have. Now, once you once you've done that, right? Now, I think the next challenge that you're going to have is facilitating and encouraging the collaboration and the communication that's going to be needed to provide to counter to provide the like organic communication between the teams and collaboration such that you can counter some of the natural fragmentation that is going to happen between the teams, and to disseminate the expertise that is also going to develop, right? So naturally, I've been there. You're in a Scrum team. You've got a board. Your head's down. You've got your Scrum master beating you up, your product owner telling you, we need to develop these features, yada, 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 fast, fast, fast. The last thing that you're worried about is what the other teams are working on, right? So now you're developing your expertise, you're focused on your team and what it's working on, and you are in a vacuum, of you're oblivious to what's going on around you. And I say that you absolutely positively want to do everything in your power to make sure that that does not happen, right? That
Yeah,
is that's you're asking for basically failure if you
exactly.
do not if you don't counter that. So
Yeah,
I think that's one of the huge challenges, right? Is that management and the encouragement and the facilitation of that cross team communication.
Hmm.
Uh,
So,
and Go ahead.
yeah. So, Robert, like, for the discussion, you brought so many aspects of when it's come to enterprise development. So many words around it, so many processes around it. It's somewhat like in a way complex the whole process into a much more larger scale. But if I turn this question back to Chuck, like, you are most of a hands-on guy when it's come to these designing stuff. How does this architecture matters in an enterprise mobile app? Like, where do you, when you get a project for yourself saying this is going to be a large scale application inside a huge multi-billion dollar company, how do you take that designing the architecture of it?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting how you approach it. I think the whole concept of building an architecture in the enterprise and the enterprise development side of it has really evolved, mainly because mobile is relatively new compared to some other aspects of software development. I think things like always, they start out simpler and smaller, and they grow and grow and get more complex. There's more and more developers, and teams grow. And so a lot of the concepts get formulated out of pain points, right? What were some of the things that were difficult to do? And in my experience, it's no different. So really, what you have to think about is, okay, there's the obvious things where, we need to be as efficient as we can. We need to deliver in a timely manner, but we really need to be able to scale. And the scaling part is really the biggest piece of it. It's not so bad if you've got, the first mobile team that I ever worked on, and Robert can attest to this because I was on a team with him. There were only 3 or 4 developers, right? So in a small team like that, it's much easier to have constant collaboration and communication with the entire team, and things like merge conflicts and stepping on each other's toes in the code are a little bit less of an issue. But now escalate that and think about, okay, now we have an organization where we started out small and we got really big, and now we've got hundreds of developers, right? And we've got hundreds of thousands of lines of code and all these different components and all these things. So really, where it leads us to, and kind of the basis for all this is, you sort of end up in a situation where you have to modularize. You have to break things up from, the idea of thinking, okay, I've got this giant monolithic thing, and now I need to break it up and assign ownership and think about things as things like, um, code ownership and the different teams within the broader team, and how are we going to enable these different teams to work independently, to not be constantly broken because of dependencies on other teams, all those kinds of things. So I think that there's lots of ways to do this, and it's there's lots of opinions out there, but really there's some core concepts that you kind of want to focus on. We want to be able to, by modularizing and breaking our app up into self-sufficient modules or components, we can inherently gain some scalability if we're able to allow feature teams to work as independently as possible. You've seen this at Cisco Labs, Ishan. I've actually been a part of a few teams who have embarked on this modularization journey, and we've been able to see the benefits of that. Where if you do it correctly, you can really have an entire team owning a small module of that app and really be on their own. They're not going to be blocked by other teams or changes that are being constantly made in the broader app. There's a few other things that are really important here. When you're thinking about modularization, you have to think about things like loose coupling, right? We don't want to tie pieces of the app together and bind them by implementation details. We don't want to have a situation where we have to where we want to make a change and now we've broken 10 other things in the app.
Chuck, let me just hold you for a second there. So you were talking about modularization of the application. So most of like for me, before I joined Cisco, modular means a group of files, maybe a folder structure. But in your case, it's a different way of architecture of the project, right? How we set up the project. Maybe you could emphasize it on that, like how we can break the
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of us start out, thinking of modules as, I'll just structure the code a certain way and put these files in these folders and these are related. But it's really more than that, right? Obviously we've got tools out there on the iOS side. You've got Swift Package Manager now and making its presence more known, and of course CocoaPods and Carthage, some of the more well-known dependency managers. But really what it comes down to is it's more than just separating things out into folders, right? It's being able to hide implementation details and prevent any leaking of these modules being invasive to their siblings, right? You really want to design, and we'll obviously talk more and more about this, but you want to be able to make it so that okay, I'm self-contained here, and something that's going to use me knows nothing about my implementation details. You don't want to corrupt that. You want to be able to make changes and evolve and iterate on those modules without constantly having to go through the entire app and make changes all over the place. And if you simply put things in folders, you're not doing anything to prevent any loose coupling. The old adage of if someone can, they will. As your team grows, someone might say, oh, okay, I really need to access this class. But really, where they want to access it, it really shouldn't be tied to that other class. They shouldn't really know anything about the implementation details in that other module. And you're not going to be able to enforce that simply by creating folders. But what we do on for example, on iOS, we'll build these out into frameworks, and we will expose only what we want to expose by creating a contract and by binding to interfaces and not implementations.
Okay, so we do have one question from the audience. Like, I think I can shoot this question to both of you. So, one is asking, can we use cross-platform frameworks for a scalable enterprise app? I think this is one of the questions we always get. How do you see that? Maybe we can start from Robert this time. Like, how do you see a cross-platform application on a scalable level? How scalable it is? Robert, you're on mute.
Is there, so what exactly are we, what's the what do we mean by cross-platform framework? Are we talking about things like
React Native, Flutter.
React Native
Yeah.
and okay, so I have a very, 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 very strong opinions on, you know, these cross-platform solutions. It's probably not popular because it's the more expensive option. It is my opinion that for scalability and giving your customers the best experience possible, that really is best achieved. Okay, cannot only, it is best achieved by going fully native, right? Yes, it's more expensive. Yes, it's a lot of work, but at the end of the day, I think personally, it is the best experience. However, with that being said, I definitely believe there is a time and a place for cross-platform development. Actually, I say if you are building enterprise apps, you know, for consumption within your company, do it, right? You need to be fast. You know, okay, and I'll say, are the employees less important than the customers? Yeah, maybe, I don't know, right? But your employees aren't going to give you, you know, 1-star ratings because your app isn't, you know, good, right? So anyway, I think that is, you know, a perfectly reasonable, application of cross-development tools. I've also, you know, if you look at the history of, you know, they come and, you know, you've got, okay, I'll say, I can't say Cordova is necessarily dead, can I? But because I had to build a plugin for it recently, so it's not, you know, quite dead. But, you know, you see them come, you see them go, you build up, you know, people build up, use them, they find their, you know, weaknesses, and then they somewhat get abandoned. I mean, I've seen it a lot where you know, you want to get to market fast, right? And you are still trying to staff up. So, you know, you come and you have no choice, right? But you develop maybe version 1 of an app, you know, you're either being hybrid, right? Or, you know, just with a web view, right? And then doing your own bridging, or if you need it, right? Or you make use of, you know, Flutter or React Native or Cordova. And then I find that it then ends up getting, more often than not, it ends up getting rewritten. So you've got to build the staff, you've got to, you know, chuck what you've done. Sorry, Chuck. You got to get rid of what you did and you start all over again. That is a repeated pattern. Even in my, you know, I haven't worked everywhere, but, you know, anecdotal evidence, I've got evidentiary support from at least the, you know, where I've worked, that is the case, right? So
Yeah.
As far as the scalability, I mean, I think it will, you know, it can, like I said, it serves its purpose. It may get you over a hump. It's applicable in some instances, but I think your best bet is to just go mobile, fully native, because you may end up there anyway. And so skip that first thing.
Yeah, by saying that, Chuck, like, I feel, do you have the same thing? But let me add something for you to answer also. Like, we are getting a question from the audience saying, like, when you modularize the application, is it better to structure the application in feature-wise, or is there any other way we can make these modulars, and also how this modularization, if you have experience or if you have any idea about how this happens in cross-platform also?
So me personally, I have not worked on any enterprise level cross-platform applications. I've always been a native guy, but to that point, the idea of modularization is not new in software in any context, right? I mean, it's really not, it's not dependent on what technologies you're using. This is more of a paradigm and a concept, right? You know, really what it comes down to is you're trying to build software in a componentized manner. I mean, this has been done for years, right? For many years. And you know, a lot of it is because you want to make your teams more efficient. You want to be faster to market, all those kinds of things. And speaking of that, to touch upon what Robert was talking about regarding cross-platform, there's a lot of factors that are going to go into the decisions, whether or not you want to go native or if you want to use a cross-platform technology. There's things to consider. Number one, you know, what about the skill set of your development team? If you you know, have 10 developers and not a single one of them knows Android or iOS natively, but they're, you know, really strong JavaScript developers or whatever it is, maybe you want to second guess, you know, initially, okay, well, right now, this is my team, this is the skill set I have and the budget I have. You know, maybe we'll try one of these technologies. You know, maybe that's the way to go. But I mean, you know, there's other things to consider. You know, using any open source technologies, for example, where, you know, this stuff is being maintained by someone else. Well, you know, you're creating a dependency there, right? If they decide, well, we're no longer going to support this, and that's the end of it, then, you know, you could be in a pickle there. But really, you know, I think this is one of those topics where people are looking for that silver bullet answer, and like you're going to hear me say a bunch of times, the answer is it depends. And there's a lot of factors. It depends on the size of your organization. It depends on the skill set. It depends on how much money you have to invest, how much you're willing to spend. Like Robert said, if you're going to go full native, then you realize you have to find, you know, you have to build two separate teams with two different skill sets. But there's a trade-off there, right? You by going native, you have the advantages of leveraging all of the features and all of the power that the platform natively provides without having to wait for, you know, the cross-platform layers to quote unquote catch up.
Okay, so if I ask a different aspect of it, when it's come to different modules, maybe Robert can also pitch in. How do you, so we have now, whether it's feature-wise or whether it's core, how do you prioritize the work? Because right now there's a feature building going on, and we do have technical devs coming in, and we have totally mutually exclusive units of the application. How does this come in with the maintainability of the code itself? Because when it's modular, multiple teams can work independently without knowing what each other is doing to be in a certain up. So in that way, how do you maintain the quality? Whether it's unit testing or is it organic communication? How can we do that? And also, how can we give this parity between the feature building and the technical depth, maybe core of the application? Robert, you're on mute again.
Robert, yeah, I'm not muted. So, so you actually asked a whole bunch of different questions in there. So, you know, maybe one of the ones that I'd like to kind of, and I think it was actually also asked when with Chuck, was the, you know, let's look at, I think the question was, what do your modules look like, right? What is their structure? Because I think before you can even worry about its testability, right? The first step is deciding, what does the modular topology look like, right? And I think I think the question was, hey, do you organize them by, features or whatnot? I'll pair what Chuck said is, it is going to depend on the solution, on what you need to do, on your needs. However, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of talk about this, topology a little bit, because I think it's actually fascinating for me. I love it. I've had 2 opportunities to do this personally in the past. So I'm actually somewhat of a fan of kind of looking at the using the I think it's called the Parthenon model. At least that's what we were referring to it whenever we were getting started. So basically, your modular topology, if you draw it as kind of component boxes, it resembles, it's Greek, right? Roman, Parthenon, right? So the base is, your core foundation level, right? It is, it's for me, the definition of it is that functionality that can be used by any mobile application, right? So you kind of think about historically, it's been where the network is maintained, right? Maybe some analytics, maybe some logging, maybe some, just stuff that is not specific to your app. It's something that I can lift it up and basically give it to anybody. Because if you think about it, every app that I've worked on has actually been its core the same, right? Then on top of that, you get a little bit more, as you move up, you get more and more and more specific. And then in between your cross modular frameworks, you build your feature modules, right? And in there, that's where you do, that contains your UI, your business logic, your whatever, in order to support the features that whatever it is that you're building, right? And generally we consider those features, right? So when you do that, I think that then kind of goes along towards, the next part of your question is, the separation, the responsibility, then we can even also go into the testability, right? So yes, I mean, when you model the Parthenon, that they go to your feature teams, right? It's actually very, very, very easy to, it's naturally, the distribution is natural, right? Feature team, your Scrum team 1 works on feature A, right? They have this module, they can work on it as long as they follow the rules, right? Which, it is actually, when you modularize, it's actually very easy to follow the rules. And you have 2 simple rules: unidirectional flow of data up and down, or just up, right? Data never flows down, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, I might get my words backwards, right? So you don't necessarily have, you only have awareness of what's below you, right? Not what's above you. I think that's what it is, yeah. Right? Then, was that? And you can't talk across modules, right? So, because that's the other big no-no, is you can't communicate laterally across your feature modules. So if you follow those 2 simple rules, which, they're simple to say, they're not necessarily simple to do, then you make your lives a lot easier, and you kind of get away from some of the troubles that Chuck was referring to, right? So now, as far as those cross-platform, the cross-modular, your foundation level, your UI, kind of widgets or whatnot layer, those are critical, right? Those are actually the modules that have the most impact. If a bug in your core, in your foundation, is going to be exposed everywhere, right? So as far as the testability goes, those must be rock solid, right? When you start, before you write the first line of code, you need to have your, plan of, what is the testing going to look like? What tooling am I going to use? Am I going to use SonarQube? How am I going to do my, what static analysis am I going to do? How am I going to measure my quality? Because you also think about it, the other advantage of this modularization, I'm probably getting way ahead of myself, is I can take that information and I can, if my boss comes and says, oh, great news, we're building another app, right? I can now take that out, well, actually, because I don't even need to take it out, right? It's probably sourced somewhere else, right? Whether it's an Artifactory on Android or, Swift Package Manager out on a repo somewhere else. We reference that repo in our new app, and now I've just saved, I'll be generous, I've saved 3 months worth of work, right? Just by, pulling that module. And if it's mature, then it's good, right? It's the whole mentality of the third party, why we use open source libraries, right? They're out there, they're ubiquitous, they're proven, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those concepts can be, applied internally, right? And I think that is, also, that's also a huge benefit. So did I get everything in there, or at least touch on it briefly?
Yeah, you did, Robert. I mean, we are getting very interesting questions from the audience. So I'm thinking of taking one out. So this question goes for, I think, for Chuck. So one of the participants is asking us, are there any design patterns that you specifically prefer to use when it's come to connecting the backend and the front end in larger scale?
I mean, it depends. I mean, there's there's lots of patterns and things, but I think really the main thing to keep in mind is just following the basics of abstraction, right? One thing that we want to make sure that we do is we don't want to commit our code to directly talking and binding to specific implementations. So, for example, most apps, you're going to have some sort of networking layer that's going to be making API calls and all those kinds of things. Well, we know that we've got, Apple from an iOS standpoint, we've got URL session, and then we've got third-party libraries that incorporate a lot more of the complexities, like AlamoFire, which is, become a de facto standard for networking in the iOS community. Well, these are still specific implementations. They are, they're directly, they're just a specific, very, very implementation, detail-based implementation that we don't want to be interacting with directly, right? We want to make sure that, especially in the enterprise, you really want to be sure that you've abstracted out. You can, how you do that, what patterns you want to use. Well, on iOS, it's very common to back things by protocols, right? We use protocol-oriented programming. We create protocols that give us the contract and expose those calls and those service calls for clients to call to consume. And if our boss comes along at some point and says, hey, no more third-party libraries, we can't use AlamoFire, we need to change our implementation. Well, okay, then we go and we swap it out for something else, and we don't break the rest of our app. So I think really, the implementation isn't really as important, but the important piece is that we provide an adequate level of abstraction to allow for swapping out those implementations, not just for testability, but as a matter of what preferences are within your organization. This happens a lot more than people think. I think it's always the idea behind, oh, well, I need to do this for testability. Well, it's not just that. It's the ability to change, under the hood without affecting all of the other pieces of the app.
Yeah, and then to that point, you can fool yourself by saying this is never going to change, right? We're always going to use Alamo fire. So why do I need to worry about, or we're always going to use vendor X, right? So why can't I just talk to vendor X? I can guarantee you that more often than not, that vendor is going to go. And you're going to then have the challenge of, if I integrated directly, I've got a lot, how much work do I have versus if I can just go in to, behind my abstraction and change the implementation, your tests should all still pass, right? Because your tests are validating your interfaces and the data in and out, right? You can pretty much guarantee, with having much less work and impact to situations like that. Because they
Yeah, yeah, and I'll add to that too. I mean, from I know the question was asking about patterns. It really just depends also on the functionality in your app. If it can be as simple as creating an abstraction over an API layer, like we just talked about, or maybe your app uses a local database, for example, and you need to make combinations of calls where you want to show the user the locally cached data first, but then in behind the scenes you want to fetch newer data, all those kinds of things. So you can follow a repository type of pattern or a data source pattern where you can put an abstraction layer over your basic CRUD operations. In some cases, it can be more complex. So you may want to even create a massive abstraction layer over top of any of your database calls, because you decide, well, we want to switch, from using core data to, SQLite or whatever, or I'm sorry, to GRDB or Realm. So generally, there's lots of patterns. It really depends on the functionality in your app, and what you need it to do. But those are generally the ones that, in my experience, have always been kind of the fallbacks. But the real important takeaway is to make sure that you've got that layer of abstraction, for both, for obviously the main idea is swapping out implementations and being able to test your code, and to create control and predictability over those dependencies.
And I think I may have another one too, and I don't know if this is relevant. I don't know if it's a pattern, right? The other thing that I think when you're dealing with client server communication, it's not so much the client server communication itself. There's also, what is that communication? What is being communicated? So the other thing that is, I think, extremely important is the extraction, you want to take your business logic you want to extract as much business logic as you can out of your front ends and put it as far back as you can, right? So if you've got a common set of, a common business logic functionality, that you can do it one of two ways. You can either replicate it twice on on each platform and hope that you did it the same, right? Because now that's a lot of overhead to make sure that, oh my God, okay, yeah, I just talked to the Android guys, they said this, or I pulled the iOS code and this is how it is. Or you can simplify it a bit and take that logic, push it up into the back end, and then basically the front ends are merely responsible for the display and the rendering of that data, right? So I think that's also very, very important. And I think that also will help immensely with, the testing and the verifying, because, one of the things that we're, if you're going to do it twice, you might as well make both platforms the same, right? Because that's nothing is more frustrating to QA and the product team when iOS does one thing and Android does another, and now you spend a bunch of time figuring out why, right? Move that to the server and then just let the clients show it on the screen. You have a much less chance of deviation in behavior. So
exactly. So Chuck, we do have one interesting question from one of our audience. So this is more of a, I think, it becomes process and engineering together. When we have a large scale application with higher number of users, and when we have a set of rules what we're going to follow, but with the advancements or the integration with new technology such as Swift UI or with Jetpack Compose, how do we can bring that into our project? How do you introduce them?
So is the question asking how do we introduce new technologies into a modularized architecture as they emerge? Okay. So that's actually a great thing to bring up, because that's one of the things that I love so much about modularization. I think so if you're like us, and you're a mobile developer, you're always reading blogs and following the community and seeing what people are doing and patterns they're following and all those kinds of things. It's no different with any new technologies or whatever it is, right? Assuming that those technologies can work together with the existing technologies that you've used. But one of the great things about modularization is it's a lot easier to introduce newer technologies and different patterns, which I group them into the same thing here because it really follows the same type of paradigm. I think we tend to think, okay, I'm going to write my app and I'm going to use MVVM as my UI pattern, and everything has to be this. Or I started my app, 3 years ago, and the team has grown, and we started out using MVC, but now I'm noticing that I want to get into RX Swift with NVVM. So, what do? I have to rewrite my entire app. Or now I want to bring in Swift UI and maybe see if I can build some Swift UI elements or whatever it is, some new technology. And actually, that way of thinking, it can be overwhelming, and sometimes you think it's not feasible. But in reality, by breaking things up into smaller pieces, it's much easier now to introduce newer technologies, newer patterns. You don't have to rewrite the entire app. You can slowly do it piece by piece and bring in these different technologies and these different patterns into different parts of the app. And by having those separated out components and separated out modules, it's a lot easier where you don't have to, it's going to be a bit of an undertaking, obviously, to change something or to redo it a certain way, but it's much easier to take a small bite out of that elephant or a sip out of the ocean than to try to swallow it by, just converting everything over. With that modularized approach, you can basically say, okay, well, I have this smaller feature here. I want to experiment, and maybe I will use some Swift UI elements here or some other pattern or some other technology that has come along, and I want to introduce it here in this particular module and see how it goes. And then we can iterate on that. But now I haven't made this an invasive process where I've now taken over my entire app and I've handicapped all of my other developers because it's taking so long to redo everything or to bring in the new technology and replace.
Okay, so we touched so areas on when it's come to modular. Let's go for a different angle. I think this question goes to Robert. So there's a question asking us: do you believe it's easier to deliver functionality in every sprint in enterprise mobile application versus non-mobile? What are the challenges, and if not? Robert, Mike, yeah.
I should just stay off mute, but then you'll hear the cat. So the question was, is mobile easier to? I didn't quite get the question. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, sure. Let me just get it. So yeah, do you believe it is easier to deliver functionality every sprint in enterprise mobile apps versus non-mobile? What are the challenges?
Is it easier to develop mobile apps than not?
Yeah, so if I rephrase the question,
Yeah,
uh, do you think to deliver functionality or features when it's come to mobile, it's harder than non-mobile? Because I mean, if you look at it, our release process is a bit different. We have to wait for a couple of days. How we can take that into a sprint kind of a rhythm?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, for those of, for those folks in the audience that are, not familiar with the release process, there is a bit of an overhead, especially on iOS with, you can't, it's not like the web, right? And I think that's also a sort of, it's also sometimes organizationally a source of confusion or challenge is, on mobile, you can't just, push a button and have it go live, right? There is actually, like you can on the web, right? So you can't actually, you can't do that, right? There are steps that need to be followed. There are things that need to be done. There are process changes that need to be, made. So, I mean, as far as, what do you do? Um, However, there are things that you can do mobile and organizationally and whatnot. So continuous delivery, to production is not really necessarily at the moment a reality, simply because of, well, mostly because of Apple, right? Um, However, there are things that you can do, to help your feature teams get as close as you can to continuous delivery, right? You can get all the way up to that point where you submit to the App Store and then just wait and then have to push a button, right? I mean, there are a lot of, there are levers and leverages that we can use from, web experiences and web processes, right? I am, if you want to do that, you have to change your philosophy or your mindset on your testing, right? Your testing approach, right? I think that is the most important part of the delivery is, traditional mobile app, okay, actually traditional testing is, the ice cream cone, right? Where you've got your little itty bitty, unit tests, and then you may have some level of, other audit, which are, automated, and then maybe another level of automated user acceptance test, whatever that is, right? Functional, whatnot. And then you've got this big old band of your manual UI tests. Well, if you do that, you can't have quick continuous delivery, right? Because you spend all your time testing. So the first thing you need to do is, kind of adopt your team, your organization, right? And this is hard. It's very hard, is to build the, and then good luck for if there's anybody on this call that has actually successfully automated all of that UI testing in an efficient, not multi-million-dollar project, let me know, because I'd be interested in having a panel discussion with you. But you got to change your mindset such that you're modeling, your entire team, your entire organization has embraced and is modeling the testing pyramid, right? Where everything that you do, every line of code that you write, you should be thinking about, how am I going to test this, right? How am I going to unit test this? How am I going to structure this so that it is testable, right? In an automated manner, right? And not, well, I'll just make a UI test, right? That will run during regression and, and cover it then, right? That's one of the, my teams are probably sick of me harping on, when they tell me that they need services, I said, no, you need unit tests, right? When you're developing. So, any rate, such as the point that, because the bottleneck is going to be your UI testing. If you can get that as small as possible, that can be automated also. And then that will let you get towards continuous delivery and the entire, like I said, to your point of, the Scrum teams, everybody's got to be thinking about that, right? And how do they write their code such that they can model the pyramid so that you can deliver quickly. And that's the only way you're going to get to, mobile delivering as quickly as, our web, colleagues and counterparts.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Chuck, since Robert touched this area, unit testing. So, how do we know how to write unit testing? Like maybe TDD. I mean, there are so many buzzwords in the industry. How do we maintain the quality with unit testing, and also how do we know like what is the right amount of testing? And when it's come to method writing, also what's your thought process when you write a method? How do you make it testable?
Yeah, so I think this is a topic that developers can go back and forth on forever. It's every team I've been on, this has been a dominant presence in conversation and problem solving. So let me start out by saying, let me sort of go to the tail end of your question first. I'll lead in with that, where I think what a lot of teams really get hung up on is this idea that they have to quantitatively measure exactly how much test coverage they have. While there's merits to that, because you do say, you say, hey, I'd really, really like to have, 80% test coverage or whatever. But again, to go back to it, it really depends. At the end of the day, the ultimate goal is as a developer, I would love to have every bit of logic that I have in my app testable and covered by some sort of unit test. Is that realistic? Probably not. I mean, it's really going to depend on a lot of different factors. It's going to depend on the skill set of your team. It's going to depend on how much time you have, what the organization's goals are as far as, timeliness of delivery and quality. But I think, at the end of the day, as engineers, it's important for us to do our part, even if we, because writing tests and following any sort of testing paradigm is always going to add cost to the production of whatever application you're building. It's just a matter of, again, software development, so many trade-offs. It's a matter of, okay, how much do I want to ensure my quality? How much time do I want to save down the road by, taking the time up front to write all these tests? But the big key is you've got to be able to architect your code. You've got to write your code in such a way that it's easily testable. And, again, that falls back on, following some sort of UI pattern, being able to separate out your UI from your business logic is very important. And being able to control and predict dependencies that are going to enable you to test things like side effects. And then, you can even get down a little further into that, following a more functional paradigm of programming. Now we're seeing a lot more functional programming with languages like Swift, and then, Swift UI coming along, and reactive patterns like Combine and RX Swift, where you want to be able to break things down as small as you can. The goal is really, and it's very, very difficult to do, but the goal is to really try to shoot for that pure function type of implementation where you can isolate small pieces of code and test those in isolation. The important thing is for unit testing, it's not an integration test. You want to test small units. I've provided some inputs or an input, and I want to verify that I've got my output. So the answer really is I don't think there's a such thing as an ideal amount of coverage. I think from a broad view, the ideal coverage would be, every piece of logic that I've written in my app has a test, in front of it. I've never worked on an app that had 100% test coverage. It's never happened. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's obviously not impossible, but it's very unlikely. But I think that if you can really strive to say, okay, as part of our development and engineering process, all of the logic that I write, in order for it to get into the build and pass a peer review, there's got to be, some sort of, adequate testing. Adequate as in there is some base amount of coverage there, based on the code that's being submitted.
And can I also add on to that a little bit?
Yeah, Robert, go ahead.
So the other thing is that I think is also very important is you are going to be most successful if you identify and define all of those things that Chuck said before you actually get started, right? Because think about it. I have been there. I'm sure any mobile developer has been there on this team where you are 6 years into a project. Your boss comes and says, "What's our unit test coverage?" And you say, A, I have no idea because we don't even do any, right? Or B, it's 20%, right? Oh, 20%, that's not good enough. We need to have 80%. So now, and you also don't get any more time or money or people to get 80%, right? Why do that? Why abuse? You don't abuse your engineering team with that, right? You need to get it defined up front and you need to stick with it, right? And also, I would rather have rock solid, good, bad, happy path, sad path, happy path, sad path, and error path, garbage input unit tests for, okay, I'll throw up a number less than 100, than 100% of, okay, there's a word I want to use, but I'll use a nice word, bad, useless, pointless, irrelevant tests that aren't actually doing anything and gives you a false sense of security that, we have 80% unit tests. All I did was instantiate an object and assert true, and now I've just gotten 2%. What did that do, right?
Can I interject really quick, Robert, on that before I lost my train of thought? That's an amazing point, and I can speak to experience on this. For people that are running organizations or running mobile development teams and engineers, be wary of that. When it comes down to time crunches and pressure and situations that we inevitably get in as software engineers, by putting thresholds, quantitative thresholds on test coverage, you're not necessarily adding value, because sometimes, and I mean, I've been on teams where this has happened, where developers will take that short path and they'll just create a bogus test just to get the tool to say, oh, okay, you've reached the 80% that you need, even though it's not adding any value. Now, of course, this is all dependent on peer reviews, and good peer reviews will catch that and say, well, this isn't testing anything, or this isn't adding any value. This isn't going to catch anything if someone changes the code later on. So there's a lot of factors to think about there. And it's really going to depend on the dynamics of your team and your developers, right? How rigorous they are with following the process correctly, and catching these things in peer reviews. But it can happen, and it's something to think about.
Okay. I have that's one question which is getting so many votes. Maybe I could adapt something for this question, and I can hand over to Chuck on this. So the question is, we can almost achieve the same performance, look and feel of a native app using, in most cases, using platform. So why should we not use it, or is there any reason? So just to have a context for that, when you use React Native or any other. It's just not the look and feel and the performance. It's all about, for me, I do have some set of experience also. It's about maintainability also. It's very costly, to be honest. If there's a cross-platform application in a large scale, I mean, if in most of the case, some applications have a low shelf life. So in that case, we keep it aside and we work on something else. So after a time period, if someone wants to make a change, there's a huge tech debt we have to work with. Isn't the same case, Robert, when it's come to cross-platform? Like, if you do not treat it well for some time, you get a lot of tech debt after maybe a month itself, and the tech debt will take around another few months to resolve itself.
So do you mean cross-platform or do you mean mobile, right? Or native, right? There's always...
I mean cross-platform. I feel that in cross-platform, the tech debt is much larger when you compare to the native application after some time if you don't maintain it correctly.
Yeah, because in fact, I'm I'm dealing with that right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. One thing is, like, if native, still the Objective-C application compiles after 10 years, but it will be not the same for other platforms.
That is correct, because it's one of the pitfalls of any third-party library, right? The minute that you choose to adopt a third-party library, whether it's, Cordova or React or Flutter or, whatever, or Alamofire, you are at their mercy and you are at their shelf life, not yours. And they may not be compatible, right? So that is something that you, as an organization, yes, you may get to market faster, but you may find that your market shelf life is now compromised by your choices. And then again, like we said, you got to rewrite it. I'll say I'm dealing with this, as Sean knows. I mean, we're dealing with this in two cases, right? Where in Sysco, we've got an app that's written in, I don't think it's secret, it's Cordova, right? That it's kind of screwed, right? My option is to, we got to if we want to maintain that, we really kind of have to think about rewriting it, right? Bringing it into shop, right? Same with other apps that are on other platforms, right? They do require a very, very specialized care and feeding that you need to keep up with and not let it lag, and then be surprised one day, right? Where you get an email from Apache, right? Or it was Adobe, right? That says we no longer support Cordova, right? I think that's all true. So you gotta, that's part of all the trade-offs that you have to make. So again, you can't just build a cross-platform app and just throw it out and think you're done, right? To your point, you can probably do it with, if you just do it in Objective-C or, Java straight, right? Native, because every so often, Apple's going to kick you out and you're going to have to recompile it. But Objective-C is Objective-C is Objective-C, right? It's most likely going to recompile. And you're not going to have to worry about, oh my God, Adobe doesn't support Cordova anymore. What the heck do I got to do? Right.
But there's, and to piggyback on that, those are all great points. I think, so as native mobile developers, we've also put our careers in the hands of Apple and Google. Now, to be honest, I would much rather rely on Apple and Google than I would, a third-party pet project that, can be abandoned at any time. So there is that dependency, but I also, to play devil's advocate, I do think that there's a tool for every job, right? So I think that I've been a part of organizations where decisions were made eventually, okay, we're going to want to have a full native solution because we don't want to have these dependencies. But right now I've got a small budget. I'm creating a proof of concept app. I need to get it out there very quickly to do some user research. And I needed to work on both platforms. And I've got a group of 5 outstanding JavaScript developers, and we could bang this thing out, as opposed to spending lots and lots of time and delaying my shipping to market of my POC by trying to get all of those developers up to speed on native application development. So like anything else, like Robert mentioned, it's a trade-off. But I mean, as far as tech debt goes, I think it's less about the technologies that you're using, and it's more about conceptually and high level how you architected your solution. Languages and technology are simply the tools, but we have a high level set of concepts and paradigms that we want to follow that can ease the pain of some of that tech debt. I mean, and I can tell you, you're still going to have struggles with it, even if you use full-on native solutions. There is a ramp-up time for building a modularized enterprise architecture. You can ask Uber, and you can ask, Airbnb and Capital One, all these companies that have built, highly modularized, large-scale enterprise applications. It takes time and cost and energy to get to that point where you have less debt. Where a lot of the struggle comes is when you're building the foundational layers, but you're also at the same time building features on top of those foundational layers, because it's like building a house on a foundation, a cement foundation that hasn't hardened yet. So you have, you're going to have some pain points there, and it's something to keep in mind. But like most things, it doesn't last forever. And once you get to a maturity level where, you basically have now published your foundation layer and within your organization, and the code rarely changes, now development goes way faster. And that graph is really slopes up, because there's no need to revisit all of these foundational layers constantly and make changes as you realize you need them.
Okay, so since we are running out of time, and it was very deep, very I would say very interesting talk. So I have time for one last question, which has the highest vote right now. I think this question goes for Chuck. I think from on the aspect of the iOS, he can answer this question. So the question is, Chuck, when it's come to security implementation, what are the best practices we can use for both maybe Android and iOS platform to avoid anti-tampering and other threats? Do you have a generic answer on that? How we can secure our application?
Well, actually, Robert, you want to take this one? Actually, this one might be a better one.
I can start this one. So, and then we can maybe we can collaborate a little bit.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
The best way that security was described to me in the past was security is all about layers, right? I will tell you that on a mobile device, this thing is not secure. Don't think that it is. Don't be fooled by it. It is not, right? And invariably, even, Apple touts this secure enclave. That thing's going to get cracked in one of these days. Don't, trust me. So it's not secure, and don't assume that it is. So all you can do the best thing that you can do as an app developer is to make sure that you have as many of those onion layers as you can in using the best practices for each of those layers. Now, Apple is, of course, in the old days, you remember, you needed an HTTP connection, unsecure connection. Sure, you just have one, right? You can make an HTTP call, who cares, right? You still can. Well, did they take out the override? I don't even know. I think you can have specific domains, right? But at least they're helping. They're saving us from ourselves, in that perspective. So, best practices, certainly always, which we kind of have no choice, HTTPS connections, right? Also, another thing that is a very common a pattern or usage is, make use of certificate pinning in some way, right? Yes, your connection may be secure, but there can be bad guys listening because there are bad guys out there. So you definitely want to do some sort of, server validation, right? Validate that the endpoint that you're talking to is legitimate, right? There's many ways you can do that. You can certificate pin, you can do much worse or more complicated things. You can do client certificates, et cetera, et cetera. So it really doesn't matter. That's not so important. Certificate pinning is generally the current, kind of the easiest way. And that's why most people do it, right? Let me see. Then from your app itself, make sure that, one, don't put sensitive data. Your attack vector needs to be as small as possible. So minimize the footprint of your app, right? If you don't put anything on here, that was, financial companies, right? The thought is transience. Your app is completely transient. You get in, you do your thing securely, right? Following all the network best practices, then you get out, right? So if I don't put anything on the device, then nobody can hack me. If they hack me, who cares? There's nothing on here, right? Can't get nothing. Android, make sure you are obfuscating. I'll tell you, you would not believe how many apps on the Play Store are not obfuscated. I can go up and I can get them and I can look at them. And then if I know your code, then I know how to circumvent it, right? I know how to exploit issues, right? And then also make sure your follows on iOS also specifically, and possibly Android as well, although I'm not as familiar with the biometrics and the secure aspects of that. I've seen a lot of code with, say, the biometric authentication that is just not correct, right? It is using, people are still using antiquated keychain and antiquated methods, right? So you definitely want to keep up with and take advantage of all of the improvements and the updates that Apple has been making towards the biometric security. So I think that was several layers, right?
Yeah,
at least three.
I wanted to add to that. I wanted to defer to you because if anyone knows Robert, he is very passionate about security and making sure that the work we do is secure. But I wanted to add on to that, and you touched on one of the things that I was going to bring up. Something to consider. Really try to limit the amount of data that you are going to store on that device, and that's a big key. There's a lot of reasons for that. Number one is obviously security, but the other side of that coin is loss. Something that is stored on the device and not cloud-based, for example, someone drops their phone and it breaks and that's it, and it's gone, right? There's no more, whatever sensitive data they may have had is lost. The other thing that we can touch on is, if you are writing an app that is to be used within your enterprise or another enterprise, you can utilize MDM, mobile device management, as well to ensure that your users are passcode protecting their devices or following protocols that are established by your company. The other thing too is encryption. So there's trade-offs there. There's lots of solutions for persistence on both platforms. And it's something to think about. I've heard it all. I've heard an Apple engineer say, well, all you have to do is make sure that your users all have a password protected device. Well, okay, but sometimes that's not possible, right? Especially with consumer facing apps, people can find it annoying. And there's a lot of people out there that don't password protect their device. So you can investigate using, things like SQL Cipher for your SQLite databases. And then, you've got to weigh in on performance implications with that, constantly encrypting or decrypting data. So there's a lot of techniques out there, but really, the ideal thing, like Robert said, and for me, which is number one, which is really try to limit the amount of data that you're storing on the device itself.
Yeah, exactly. I think Chuck and Robert, we have reached up to the time we have so far. So first of all, thank you, Chuck and Robert, for joining. And secondly, I want to thank everyone for being with us and being a part of today's event. We really appreciate from Cisco Labs. And additionally, I mean, there are a few answers we couldn't answer because of the time limitation, but I mean, you guys could reach us via the Cisco Labs social media profiles, and we will try to answer them to the best we could. So there are a few questions. So what I would do is I will run by Chuck and Robert separately and get you guys these answers. Maybe I'll reach out to our marketing team how we can convey these messages, answers back to you. So again, finally, thank you, Robert and Chuck, for joining this session. It was very interesting. I believe it was interesting for the people who joined with us. So thanks again. We will join soon to another session, maybe one day. So have a good night and stay safe.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
Take care.